Thank you for calling Death Before Desk Job. If you are this week's guest, please leave a message and Paul will call you back once he finishes the intro.
Hey Paul, it's Derek. I just called you like 5 times, no answer. I mean, I guess this is how you treat me after I lend you $20. All right, well, call me back, I guess, if you feel like it.
Hey, this is Paul, and you're listening to Death Before Desk Job, the podcast geared towards creative individuals who are pursuing or who would like to be pursuing their creative endeavors to their heart's content. Something is different. What is different? Did somebody change the music? I'm not mad. I like it. I feel like the song was surgically removed from my brain. That brain surgeon is this week's guest, Derek Smith. He's a very talented and accomplished composer and multi-instrumentalist, locally known for his work with his former outfit Rice Cultivation Society and his latest project, Not, as well as being a member of a variety of other local outfits. He's even been the hired gun for my live band, Plutonium Lovecraft, back when I played a few times. So I knew when the show needed a theme song that Derek would be up for the challenge. He has a knack for interpreting some of the more abstract and obtuse ideas I throw his way. So when I told him I was looking for a theme song, he pretty much got it right away. Since we don't go into it in the interview at all, I'm just going to give you a little rundown of how that went so you guys can see the process. See, I didn't know what I wanted when the show first started. I found it to be one of the most challenging parts of starting the show, to be honest. I knew the themes that I wanted to cover. I knew who I wanted to talk to, but the intro was rough because when a show starts, listeners will make the determination if they're going to stick it out within the first few seconds. If they don't like the theme song or they don't like the voice, they're going to tune out. I'm sure a couple of people have tuned out on me because of it. Because of the word desk job in the title, I knew that I wanted it to hit on the point of monotony, but I didn't want it to be monotonous, if that makes sense. I didn't want it to be drab or dreary, so I needed to go the route of irony. After some searching during the initial episodes, I found some elevator music by this artist named Kevin MacLeod. He has thousands of songs that are available under a Creative Commons license. You may have heard some of his music if you watch YouTubers or play certain video games because they use his music, and all he ever asks for in return is attribution. I used his song, Local Forecast, parentheses, Elevator, in the first 3 episodes. But I knew that I wasn't going to want to keep using it because I wanted something that was tailored to the show. So you have an intro, you have incidental music for the middle, and an outro. If the guest I have on any given week is a musician, I can easily use their music, like I did for Carbone of Moontooth or Onodera last week. But if I'm speaking to a visual artist, I need something to cover the middle and the end. And I need to make sure that it's all connected. So I told Derek that for a theme song, I wanted this elevator music, dentist office waiting room type of vibe. And I didn't say much more than that. He got it pretty much right away. He sent me a version. It was a little slower than I would have liked, so I put it into my program. I sped it up. I pitched it a bit, and I sent it back to him. And then at that point, he was like, oh, okay, yeah, I see that. And he made his own version based on that. When it came to the outro, I knew that I wanted something that had the feel of like a kid's show ending. The vibe of, we're sorry, but it's time to go. We'll see you next week. Plus, I also knew that I enjoyed this element of Hawaiian music that only ever came up because Derek had sent me an album of Hawaiian music apropos of nothing the week before. I saw the irony of that music taken out of context. Plus, if you want to look at it in context, you could also look that the intro is going to be monotonous, the office music, you're unhappy, and then you have this conversation in the middle that's about being creative and following your dreams. And the end is that very relaxing vacation music. It's that association of freedom and whatnot. I could see that working. So I thought it worked both on the ironic and the non-ironic levels, if that makes sense. But how do you connect Hawaiian music to this hold music that is there. I didn't know how to do that, but apparently Derek does, because I think he knocked it out of the park. I say all of this to speak to the greater point of understanding your own intent. If you don't understand your own intent entirely, you need to make sure that you carve out the time to spend with your thoughts and really focus on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it. Sometimes you're just off the mark, and you need to be honest with yourself. I wasn't originally going to do this hold music. I was thinking of using a surf guitar, something a little more rockin' than that. But that's just because I like surf guitar. I don't really have a reason for it. So intent should really come above your personal preference. That's my opinion. And it would seem that it's Derek's opinion too, because he does speak to intent in this interview among many other interesting things and ways of thinking on a very fundamental level. I'm going to include a little index of certain talking points that he talks to in the show notes on my website, deathbeforedeskjob.net. You can get those show notes. You can also subscribe to the show on your preferred platform. Right now we're on Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'll keep adding those. And you can also now support the show on Patreon. I just started that up. If you're into what I'm doing, please consider becoming a patron. For $5 a month, I will give you early access to episodes. $10 a month, you'll get that, plus access to Ask Me Anythings, AMAs. And for $20 a month, you'll get both of those, plus a quarterly merch bundle. I will send out the first one of those on July 1st, and it will happen every 3 months after that. So please consider subscribing as a patron. Please consider sharing and spreading the word about this show. Your outpouring of support so far has been very heartwarming, and I am really fulfilled doing this. So that said, let's get to doing what I'm actually here to do. Here is my conversation with Derek Smith. Hey, Derek.
Hey, Paul.
How are things at your studio right now?
Going well. I've been managing to stay pretty productive. I feel like it's keeping me sane and giving me something to do. And, when is there ever going to be a better excuse to really put my head into where it needs to be to be creative?
It's a weird opportunity that we have right now, and I'm glad you're making the most of it. I'm trying to myself. It's hard. I mean, to combat the drive to take advantage of the time, and then the your body's drive to just sink into itself and get a little depressed. It's it's the nature of things. But I'm glad you seem to be making it work for you.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings you to the first point. Actually, there's not a direct question I ever have for this. So I'm going to kind of pose a few different angles at you, and you take whichever roads you want. We can talk about your motivations from when you started, like when you knew you wanted to be creating and composing and performing. We could talk about the earliest signs of that, and we could also talk about how those things may have changed over time, if that's true for you.
Well, it's definitely changed over time, but I find that it never really felt much like a choice. Of course, there's been points where I've said, oh, I want to be doing this, or I want to be doing this more. But it feels very much like a part of who I am and who I was even growing up. I don't know. It's just how I interface with the world around me or something. I don't know. It makes, to me, I feel like music and sound makes more sense than just about anything else. So I like to reside there, and yeah, it's not a choice. It doesn't feel like a choice. It doesn't feel like a decision. It just feels more like, for better or worse, I'm wired this way. And I guess though, when you actually, that's really the core of it. But I do feel it is true that as you're in different points in your life and things look a lot different at different points, it definitely does change, and it does lead to approaching things differently. As far as where I'm at right now, this is true for myself. I'm sure it's true for a lot of people that right now in the middle of this pandemic, I do feel like I am coming back to a very direct and very personal kind of relationship to it. I guess because it's hard to imagine going out and playing it, you know.
Sure.
Nowhere to go play. Or, like, that's going to be a while before that type of thing happens. And I think part of it's also because I've had a lot of ideas sitting around developing over a long period of time, and right now I'm kind of really diving headfirst into a lot of them. So it feels very personal right now, which feels very good.
It sounds like, since you've said you were in fact wired this way to do it, that your motivation has always been to do it as a means of communicating something maybe in a clearer way than you could otherwise. And I know that as a listener and a fan of yours for years, I was able to get a look into your head, and for better or for worse, I mean, I saw what was in there, but there is something that is deeply revealing about your music, and I can see what you mean about using that as your interface to the world, and I like that a lot, that term. I think anybody willing to put themselves out there via creative medium is doing the same, and I think it's super important to, I mean, I've heard it talked about as a discipline. I've heard it talked about as a passion. I really appreciate hearing it being spoken of as a language and a way of conveying something that you might not be able to otherwise. I did want to touch on the fact that you said, because you cannot play live right now because of circumstances outside of our control, you're kind of doing a little house cleaning and working on things that have been sitting there and waiting to come out. Let's pretend this is 2 months ago and this is a non-issue. We are moving freely. And is there a way in which you would prioritize what got done and the way in which you created, and how does something like that go for you?
That's a good question, because I feel like that really is, at least for myself, I feel like such a big part of, being creative and working on things, those kind of choices and how you approach those choices. Because, I remember when I started, it was more like, you learn how to, okay, I finished a song, or I finished this, or I learned how to do that. Like, there's some pretty clear steps you have to take and get comfortable with taking regularly in order to do something. And I think at a certain point, after making a few albums and things like that, I knew I could do those things. You know what I mean? And as I kept working on music, I remember one point years ago, I wondered, gee, am I gonna just run out of ideas, or am I gonna dry up or something? And because I guess after doing a bunch of things, I guess I wondered, because it didn't. It's something I'd never confronted or even considered, and it's really turned out to be like the opposite. Like, at a certain point, it's just you have more and more ideas, you see more and more possibilities, and so yeah, at a certain point, it became really a huge question of how do you prioritize? What do you actually work on? It makes you really question, I would say, quality of what you're doing, except, and that's obviously an important thing too. But I guess, I feel like trying to self-assess your own quality, I think, can sometimes both take you out of it and sometimes can lead to kind of a more negative, critical place. So I guess the word isn't quality that I'm looking for. I guess it's more about, intent, or what what's your vision, or what are you really trying to do with something?
It sounds like you're talking about the ability to critique yourself.
Yeah. With the interest of guiding it, while you're still in the process, I feel like when you finish with something, that kind of self-critique kind of thing, that's very important, but that's also something that just changes so much over time as well.
How has that changed for you? Just again, I'm going to drop some names for context. Derek has been performing under different names for years. I came to know him first as Rice Cultivation Society. That project went on for a very long time, took many different forms, and now Derek performs under the moniker of Not. So going from, say, the early indie recordings of Rice Cult, where you have yourself, microphones, and acoustic guitar primarily, to moving into the world of Not, which is an electronic analog soundscape. What changes that whole process for you? Like, what has changed in that process of?
Well,
I'm sorry. That
That was a lot.
let me narrow it down.
no, that's okay. That's okay.
I just meant to say that you were talking specifically about how the process of judging your own content,
Yeah.
specifically in that realm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, looking back at earlier things, I mean, I'm very happy and look back very fondly at almost everything that I've done. I mean, there's things that I could look back on, and at this point, like when I look back on certain things, I could say, well, I know a lot more about recording now, or or maybe I could probably like nail things better musically, but at the same time, like, they wouldn't be what they are had I done them differently. You know what I mean? And I couldn't have done them differently than how I did, because that's where I was when I made them, So, I mean, I can look back and definitely, with a critical lens, but at the same time, just on a personal level, I guess that kind of critique, I don't, of course I could find things to be negative about if I really want.
If I know you, then yeah. But
yeah. Well, no, of course. I mean, but no, I'm generally very happy with, particularly talking about Rice, because that's that's the bulk of the older stuff. But I even think about like stuff I did a few months ago, and I could be like, oh, I should have done that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's funny because it's like it could be like 2 seconds after you finish recording something, and you might be like, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's what I'm saying. I mean, like that type of thing, that's just there. That's just, that I don't really take a lot of stock in that. Not to say that I don't do it, because I think it's kind of, it's automatic. You're going to have a reaction or thoughts about what you've done, and that's fine. But like, how that's changed over time, I guess it's more just that I could think of a particular song and say, okay, when I wrote that, I thought about it this way. Then when I recorded it, I thought about it another way. 6 months after that, I thought it another way. Now it's 10 years later, I think about it totally differently. That type of thing is always shifting. And I guess not just in terms of self-criticism on craft or artistry. I mean, I guess just more on a personal level, like what something might mean, or why I like it might be totally different than why I liked it in the past.
Sure. I can see that. I mean, things age differently. There are things that I mean, if I was to draw on a personal example, I just know that there's some work that I did when I was younger, and I remember looking at it, and there's a portion of it that I go, man, I had a charisma I didn't have. I had an energy I didn't have. But not to me looking back at work that I did, when I was like, I don't know, puberty, of course there's a different energy, because you're dealing with a different brain. And at the same time, I look at that same stuff and I go like, oh, this is trash. I could have made that look like that could have been a lot more impactful if I did it now. But now my brain doesn't operate the same way. And I guess it comes down to mitigating that whole thing and having to trust that these pieces that we make are time capsules very often. And you have to look at them as such.
That's true. I think another way of thinking about it too, and this is something I'm trying to get a little bit more used to, especially given that, as I was saying, I've been trying to do a lot of house cleaning musically because I've had so many ideas, and as I was saying, trying to find different, what's the right avenue, what's the right process to be working on these things, like which ones am I choosing to work with and push in which directions, is that these things can happen over a long period of time and in ways you don't expect them to. I love Neil Young. I know that there's been cases where he wrote a song in like 1974, played it once at a show, like somebody had like a bootleg of it, and there's like one performance of that from like 1974, yeah. And then like in the 2010s he would release an album and that song would be on it, like maybe like up to, and like he played it once get like, you would think like up until that point when he actually put it on the album later, you'd think like, oh, he must have gave up on that or he didn't like it or whatever. It's like, no, he was saving that for when he felt like it was necessary. And he's said that that's what he does, like he has large library of songs that he's written that are not released, like catalogs of it. I'm not prolific in that sense, and I'd never compare myself to Neil, but the I guess just that idea. I feel like I'm slowly starting to get a hang on that, because I felt like in the past it used to be a little bit
Right.
more like if there was a song and it was unfinished, I couldn't let that happen, And I mean, I think that there, and to be clear, there definitely are points where you don't want to let something sit for too long, because I've definitely had issues with that as well. It doesn't always work. But like,
right, some ideas are milk and some are wine. Like some need to age and some you got to do right now, otherwise it doesn't work.
Right, exactly. That's a good one. I like that. Some are milk and some are wine. Yeah, and that's true. And I guess that's that's something that you learn over time, I guess, and how to recognize it.
In regards to your library or your back catalog of songs that have not made it out of your site yet, do you have a process for yourself as to how you go back through your own catalog and check on the eggs, if you will? Like, how do you go back and do that?
That is a good question, and
and by the way, totally fine if the answer is no.
No. Well, it's funny because you're doing a podcast here, and like I would hope that your listeners could listen and take away something. I wish I could give like good advice, saying like, oh, this works. I've mostly found things that don't work. So maybe that could be helpful.
That is the most helpful thing you can tell anybody. What doesn't work? You're saving people a lot of time.
Well, I think okay. Well, maybe this is something I've learned, that there is kind of a middle point to both holding onto an idea and throwing them out too quickly. And particularly with music, because I remember when I first started writing, because I didn't have such easy ways to record. When I first started, it was a big pain. I didn't know how to do it well. So I wouldn't record something unless I was really going to record it. That meant that when I was working on stuff, like as I was writing, I wasn't recording like demos. I wasn't recording notes on my phone. It was like all by memory. I would play something on the guitar again and again and just kind of hope that I remembered it the next day. And I mean, sometimes I'd write some stuff down, and the thing with that though is that to some degree, and this is the good thing about doing it that way, is it's a built-in filter that filters out bad ideas. Unfortunately, sometimes the really good ideas slip by too.
That is a very good point, because I used to save material the same way. For my songs, I would say, you know what? If it's there in the morning, it's good enough. And that's not always the case. What do you find to be the most effective linear way to get an idea from... I'm trying to just think of a worst case scenario. I don't know, in a meeting or something. I don't know. But you're somewhere that you cannot readily record. You're not ready to plug in. Do you have any tricks for how you preserve those ideas and get them into the vault before they fade away? Is there any sort of...
That's a good question. Well, what I was saying is that I used to have that attitude where I wouldn't record anything, would hardly jot down anything. And then, at a certain point, I was having so many ideas and I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, there's no way. Like, I knew I was forgetting stuff, even stuff that I liked. And, there was just too much to work with. So what I started doing was recording everything, like on my phone. If I had an idea, even if it was just a little snippet, the slightest little inkling of an idea, I would record it. So then for a while, for a couple of years, I really ended up with almost the opposite problem, where I had so much recorded that I for one, if I wanted to find anything, it was organized, like named kind of. And, at a certain point, if I wanted to find anything again, it would involve so much searching. Maybe I'd have a 5-minute clip of audio, but maybe only 30 seconds of it was really what I wanted. You waste a lot of time, you lose a lot of perspective. And so, that was kind of the far swing the other way. What I think works now, what I found is you kind of have to trick yourself into forgetting that you're trying to remember anything. Like, and what I mean, how this looks for me, and what I mean by that is that, like, I have to work on something not thinking that I'm going to record it or do anything with it. I kind of have to just be with it for a while until it becomes almost like an afterthought. Like, oh, I guess I should record that, and that's what kind of works for me. Because if the other thing that was happening with when I was recording Every Idea is that I would record something before it was really fleshed out or too thought out, which on one level is kind of good. That's not always a terrible thing. But what I would do is I would say, oh, well, I know I want to fix this chord or figure out something different here. I'll do that later.
Sure.
That's bad. Because, usually, there's certain times where you kind of have to do that. You're not going to finish everything all at once. Maybe you will, but a lot of times you don't. You can't bank on that. But you can't. You also just can't say, like, oh, I have this vague notion, and I'll just do it all later. So that's a bad habit. Like, again, there's the portion of it that you have to do in the moment, and you have to let yourself get into it. And if you're thinking too much about recording it or what you're going to do later or this or that, it just gets in your way, or at least it does with me. That's what I found for myself. So, I know it doesn't sound like there's much trickery going on, but I feel like I'm tricking myself into doing it. Like I have to,
right.
I have to sit with it for a while, kind of not think at all about really anything about what I'm going to do with it. I have to really just be present with the material, and then I have to kind of almost forget that I'm turning on a recording device, and then leave it there and then do that.
I find that the pressure feels like it's on when the recording device is on. I experience it doing this, and I experience it doing any sort of demoing that I've done in the past for my material too, and it's been a big hindrance in me putting something out. When you have these recordings and you say, well, I can't change I'm going to change that chord, but whatever, and you should do it now to prevent doing later. Do you have a notation system or a log for yourself to let yourself in the future know that if you're going to play with this, you were thinking about changing this G to an A or something?
Well, there's certain things I do, like, well, as far as like actually writing anything out, I almost never really write things out unless there's something really specific that I want to remember. So, like, let's say, for example, if there's a chord progression and it's like 4 chords, well, I could listen to a recording and figure out what those 4 chords were if I don't remember them already. But, for example, if it's a more complicated finger picking pattern, I'll probably have to write it out. As far as like notes, as far as what I want to change later, it usually sticks out to me because it's also happened that I have made notes on that type of thing, and I would listen back and I'd be like, no, that doesn't need to change at all,
Right.
So I feel like, part of it is that fresh ears thing. And I think, once in a while I'll write notes down or things like that. Sometimes being too detailed with those types of things, making notes for myself, I find that it takes away a little bit of that freshness when I come back to it. Like when I come back to it, part of it is that, you work on something and at a certain point you have to know when to stop and say, okay, I've done enough for today. This is, that is where it is for today, Mm-hmm. And when I come back to it the next day or whenever I come back to it, part of the thing of stopping is to stop and let your ears not hear it, to not think about it, and then you approach it fresh.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really, that's really important. But, it's true. It's hard to sometimes know exactly what to keep an eye on and what to let rest, and I guess it just comes back to that thing that, we started with saying, like, so much of the creative process does come down to these types of things. It's not just about coming up with something, at a certain point. I mean, everyone's different, I guess, and has different approaches or maybe like things that they struggle with. But I just know for myself, I can come up with a million ideas. Like, that's not the issue.
Right.
The issue. Like, I mean, and in a way, it just, I feel like I just at a certain point have to be a bookkeeper for myself. But I have to know how to do that while still being able to get in the right mind space to be creative. So I guess that's where that idea of like tricking yourself comes in, like,
right.
You have to keep these things in mind, but you can't let them get in the way,
It seems like a very delicate balance. It's the whole process, I know, can be very fickle. And I mean, I've said myself, there are moments where the idea is there and I got to do it right now or it's gone. And if I don't work on it right now, it's all over. It was a loss. And then there are other moments where it's like, I am not getting anywhere doing this right now, and I can't touch this thing for a week. I need more stimulus. I need more input. So it does seem that like your process is this very delicate, like tightrope walk of sorts, where you have to know who you are as a person to then know how you're going to behave based on what you do during the process. So it's like you are yourself and you're also managing yourself. So it's like two people at work here. It's like that's kind of amazing.
Well, I guess so. I mean, like, and this is, I feel like this question in particular and this topic in particular is something that, this is something that, I mean, if I feel like if there's a struggle with the creative life that's not involving things like money or work or things like that, just in terms of like what's hard about being creative or working on things that are that the process itself, like what's the hardest thing about it? It's exactly this,
right?
And there's always things that are going to be hard otherwise, but to me that's what I've always found.
Right. I don't expect anybody to give me the recipe for lightning in a bottle. I don't expect anyone to ever say, well, if you close your eyes in front of the mirror and say this at 3 times at midnight, you'll have genius juice. It's not like that. So there's no...
Once in a while it is, though.
Oh, okay. So I'm glad I said something ridiculous. So can you build on what are those moments for you? What are those surefire... I've done this ritual and it works.
Well, here's the problem is that any ritual that works, it'll probably only work once.
That's peculiar.
Well, I mean, I'm not even talking about a specific thing, I guess. I mean, just saying something like, oh, you go in front of the mirror and you close your eyes and you say something. Well, I don't know. I could imagine that being provocative. But if you just say, at least to me, I mean, this is just myself. I mean, like I think I'm going to try that. But I think my point is, you have to be open to that kind of experience. And once in a while, the things, I'm talking about all this like preparation and things like that. But there's plenty of times creatively where you just do it and there it is. Like
Sure.
You don't have to sit there saying like, oh, I rehearsed it or whatever, like sometimes you play it and there it is. I didn't need to even do it again, like it just happened, that doesn't always happen. And that's where all the complications come in. But sometimes you do have to get out of your own way and say like, you have to trust yourself in a very radical way to say, this is what I came up with, and here it is. I don't think you can lead a fulfilling creative life on that alone, for sure. You know,
Right.
I feel like there are people who have that attitude with everything, and I don't think that's, well, I think it's rather self-limiting, is what I think. You know, I don't know, but I think there is something to say about leaving yourself open to a bit of chance, or like allowing yourself to just try something random. You know, one thing I did, I'll give an example actually. Um, on the album Seams, which is um, the first Not album. Uh, there's one song on there, and you know, I'm not even going to say which one because I'll leave it up to conjecture.
Ooh.
That I was struggling with lyrics, and I kind of knew what I wanted the lyrics to feel and sound like. I had a lot of lines that I liked, but the whole thing just didn't feel right. I didn't know where to go with it. So what I did, I tried the cut up method. Are you familiar with this?
No, please enlighten me.
Well, I mean, various people have done it. I knew about it through listening to some lectures by William S. Burroughs. He did this with tape, like audio tape. You take audio tape and you just splice it randomly, like not even counting or trying to be precise about it. Like just cut it at random, tape it all back together, and there's your words. You know what I mean? And I mean, he had a lot of ideas about that. I mean, you could look up and get into that get a little bit more into occult territory and things like that.
Spooky.
Yeah, I don't have that necessarily that mentality about it or idea about it. But I was like, well, you know what? I know that there's something good here, but I'm not where I wanted to go. It's not where I wanted to go. So let me just try that. So I didn't do it with audio tape. I just wrote it out, cut it up, each word, or sometimes it would be two words together that I knew I liked together, and just put them randomly, taped it all back up together, and half of it was good.
Really?
And well, I think that's the important thing though, is that, when you're dealing with these kind of more random techniques or opening yourself up to these kinds of non-intentional techniques and things like that, my view on it is that the artistry comes back in when you choose what you're actually using.
I love that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I think some people are superstitious about it and they say like, well, whatever it was, that's it. And I don't quite, I mean,
well,
I guess
you're allowed to curate your own chaos if you're the one making it, right?
That's how I feel. Yeah, exactly. And that technique was particularly helpful for that song. In general, I mean, it's something I have in the back of my head. It's not something that I'm like looking to use or think, oh, that's the way to do it now. That's not like the trick. But I guess it's about opening yourself up to just trying different ways of being creative. And maybe I was saying before, it only works once. I mean, I was kind of just joking, but like, sure, but the idea though is that you try it because you learn at least something from it, and it's something that you can go back to if you really want.
I think that's fair. I think it's dangerous territory when an artist of any walk gets too comfortable and says, I only do this, because while you are going to get very good at doing only this, I think eventually you'll start to get stale. And I think getting stale is dangerous because then you become some sort of weird parody of yourself. And while it can be important to stabilize yourself and secure a style, I think that you pour through whatever you do. So by introducing some sort of rogue element into your process, you're still going to sound like you on the other side of it. And it doesn't matter that it's not your brand of guitar. It's not your trademark color. It's not your standard style of shooting. But by virtue of the fact that it goes through your hands, you become the conduit. And by being the conduit, it's already yours. And I think your voice is louder in your work than you may even realize, because I think people know when they're wearing their influences generally. And I know that when that's happening, you may say, well, this doesn't sound like me. This sounds like Boz Scaggs or whatever, just random name. But, it sounds like whatever, and it doesn't sound like me. I don't think you hear yourself. I don't think you hear your own voice. So I think it's important to try on those different things, especially if you're the kind of person who doesn't normally do it because you're afraid of losing your own identity by switching things up too much.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Any kind of personal style, it comes through by accident. And it happens without you trying, and you're also right. It happens without you even being aware of it. It's the same thing as having like a regional accent. It's just like having a Long Island accent.
Right.
I never thought I did until I went to college, and everyone was like, "Oh, you totally do." And it's not. I know it's not a particularly strong one, but I guess it's there, and I'm sure it's there more than I realize. It's the same, but it's the same thing with any accent. But it's true. It's true with any kind of art too. Any kind of style or personal spin on things. It's important not to try to be something you're not, but you also have to open yourself up to, I guess, the broader range of possibilities of what you could be also. I think that's also very authentic because, shoot, I'm trying to remember where I read this, and I loved it so much, but I don't shows how much I loved it. I totally forgot who said it. They were talking about, it was so good. When I find this, I'll send it to you.
Sure, please do.
There's this great thing. It was talking about how art, how did they phrase this? Oh, this is what they said. They said the currency of art is influence, or the way that you give back is by showing influence, showing your influences. And that's kind of, it's in a way, it's, you're showing your love of another art, and that you're participating in something larger than yourself. Not only are you giving back to, maybe in some very figurative and symbolic way, to whoever you're showing the influence of, you're also giving that influence to anybody else who would be interested in it. You're passing it along,
Right.
And
you're sending the story down to the next generation, so to speak.
Right, exactly. And it's also because these things work so well together, or they can, like you can find influences across things that don't seem like they should have anything to do with each other. Even not even just within music, for example, but like saying like, how does this music and this seemingly totally different style of art that you wouldn't associate with it, how do these things work together? I mean, I can't think of a better example than Wu-Tang Clan. Right.
That's a very good example.
Like they it's like, okay, but it works, and it makes it, in a weird way, it just makes total sense.
But while we're talking about influence, I don't want to stray too far from this. You mentioned Neil Young. You mentioned Burroughs. I wanted to bring up someone I know to be a big influence of yours, Randy Newman. And I bring Randy Newman up specifically for this reason. Randy Newman is one of those people that kind of gets put into this strange pocket of the music world where it's satirical, but not quite. He's a musician's musician. He's got his own thing, and it's not everybody's cup of tea by any means, but the people who appreciate it. You grew up appreciating Newman. But what I want to bring up regarding the musician's musician attitude, somebody who is coming into being creative, and let's say they do not have that interest. Let's say they don't have that interest. There are plenty of people like that for me. I'll use Leonard Cohen as the example. I cannot listen to Leonard Cohen. It is impossible. And everybody tells me that likes Leonard Cohen, that you would really like Leonard Cohen. And if you go back, and plenty of people who you listen to and love looked at him and saw that as a beacon. and I can't do it. Now, do you have a way to kind of open the door to somebody who might be afraid of somebody who is so on their own wavelength to like the common listener? Is there a piece of is there a sorbet you could have that goes down with Randy Newman, so to speak, like that you could give somebody and say like, all right, when you listen to this, it's just important to take notice of these things and then you'll find the appreciation?
Well, let me say one or two things first. One is I actually didn't grow up with Randy Newman. I actually discovered Randy Newman. No, that's okay. Well, I mean, but what's interesting about it, I mean, is that you're talking about like how do you get into it? It's funny because with Randy Newman, I think part of the reason I was able to get into his music was because when I was growing up, when I was young, I really liked ragtime piano. And, you know, a lot of people would hear ragtime piano and just be like, well, that's really corny or, you know, dated or, you know, and sure, okay, fair. You know, and Randy Newman doesn't play strict ragtime. He's playing all sorts of stuff. But, I mean, I guess that kind of cornier feel, I guess, doesn't bother me. So it's that type of thing where, you know, certain stylistic elements or just you know, it's kind of like how people can't listen to Primus because they don't like Les Claypool's voice. And I love Primus, and I mean, his voice is weird as hell, but I love it, and it's for how it works with the music. But on the other hand, I can never get into Rush really because of what's his name's voice?
Right, Geddy Lee. Geddy Lee.
Yeah, Geddy Lee. You know, so everyone's got their limits with some of this stuff, and I mean, certain things like that, it's hard to say exactly how, you know, there's certain sonic things or certain just elements to a certain style that might just not sit with somebody.
Sure.
But, you know, in general, I think one of the things, if you find something not palatable, or there's just seems something off about it, you know, it comes on and you're just like, oh, I can't hear this. It's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, there's so much to listen to. But, you know, I would just say let it kind of overwhelm you. Put it on. If you want to get into it, just or try to see if you can find something in it you like. I mean, this advice might vary depending on what you're trying to experience, but this is one of the biggest ones that's ever happened to me because I used to really dislike it. It was Bruce Springsteen. Mm-hmm. I used to really dislike the boss. You know, I'll be honest, I still have my limits, you know.
Sure.
It's not like I'm not listening to him every day. He's not in my top 10 or something, but you know, it wasn't until actually Gary O'Keefe, he basically sat me down for several hours. We listened to Bruce.
Right.
And I got it. You know, you kind of just have to like let it overwhelm you or be a little grating or a little confusing or like you have to kind of not get it before you do get it, you know, but you have to sit there and let it be not your thing for a little while, you know.
The reason I feel this is so important to bring up is because I think you get like this comes down to like, you know, totally wearing your influences and giving back and letting your influences change what's going on in your own brain and how that process works. And I think that's important. I think it's important for people to really just funnel in as much as they can and run it through their own process and spit it out. And I think a big part of that is listening to things that you don't necessarily like or consuming things that you don't necessarily like, if not with the ultimate goal to like it, with the ultimate goal to say, I know why I don't like that. So let me pose it to you with Springsteen as the example. You didn't like him. And then after a session or however many, you did to some degree. What broke the dam? Was there something that put you off immediately? Like, I don't like this, therefore I don't like the whole thing. And then was there any sort of, okay, I can kind of see where this is going. And then you were able to embrace that a little bit going forward.
I think what I realized after listening to him for, you know, a while was that what turned me off originally was the sound is so big and kind of almost like self-important, and dramatic, and like, or at least that's how I experienced it. You know, like before. That's how I felt it. I was like, this is just big, kind of bloviating, kind of ridiculous music, you know. And like he sounds so self-serious, he seems so sincere, but it just seems like so silly to me. And I think after I listened to it a while, I was like, you know, I don't think he's as serious about himself as I thought. You know, like, not that he's not sincere or not that he's not serious also. It's more just that I think as I listened to it, I was like, you know, this reminds me of like some like ridiculous like High School Musical or something. You know, like this reminds me of like Broadway. This is silly music. You know, and I mean, like, I still think that, but that's why I think what changed wasn't the music. You know, obviously it was hearing more of it, but I think once I started to realize, I was like, I don't have to take this seriously. You know what I mean? I think it at least the way that it was presented to me was that here's this serious, profound songwriter, you know, and then listening to it and be like, this guy's like a giant goof. At least that's how I felt about it. And then listening to it and then being like, oh yeah, he is a giant goof. That's awesome. You know, I think that's how I take it, you know, like, and you know, again, I mean, look at how many things played into that though, is that was, you know, kind of just the surface level of the sound of it, but also I guess how other people spoke about it or portrayed it, or, you know, like
that
kind of
is part of it
image,
too, the way people speak about it and the type of person that speaks about it. And I don't want to go on a whole thing about how I like listening to Fish, but that is the prime example.
Oh boy. Yeah.
People like can't
example.
stand it because of a variety of reasons. You could just hate the noodling, but if you know, if you're turned off by like granola and hippies and you know, you're out. And for me, I wasn't necessarily turned off by those things, but I was not like a drug person, so I was afraid, and I was like I don't think I'm gonna get this. And then once I removed that, and I just like it shuffled into a playlist, and I was like, I like this song, what is this? Because I had no label. And then once the label was gone, suddenly it's like, oh, this is all right.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, you know. There's that whole cultural element, which definitely plays maybe more strongly in certain people's experiences with certain bands, that's for sure. You know, you were mentioning like Randy Newman. I mean, I guess I was mentioning the musical aspects that, you know, there's certain parts of it that people might find corny or things like that. Well, for one, is that if you listen to enough Randy Newman, you realize some of it's like pretty far from corny, you know. It's pretty intense, some of it, you know, like depending on what you're listening to. But, you know, the other thing is it's also very cerebral. And I think that like, this is probably just true of like anything that you're trying to understand or get into or get anything out of, I guess, is on some level you're trying to understand how that person experiences music. They're approaching music from all these different kind of directions, you know, like, again, like I was just saying, Springsteen, there's something that's just so performative about it. It reminds me of like, you know, this kind of like over the top performance type of thing. And, you know, but for someone like Randy Newman, it's like this heady, I'm writing a song from another person's perspective from 100 years ago, but I'm really talking about myself. But I'm really talking about contemporary politics. Like there's all these levels. You have to kind of understand that that's part of where he's coming from with a lot of this type of stuff. But that's the thing. If you just listen to his music and you know, especially if you just hear one song or something, you might not really get that part of it. So that's why, I mean, like, you know, I was saying like you got to just immerse yourself into it. I mean, if somebody doesn't explain that to you, you know, you could still get into Randy Newman if you listen to a full album and realize, oh, none of these songs he's talking from the first person. That's why you have to spend the time with it. You have to listen to it. You have to think about it. You have to, and you know, it's hard. And sometimes, you know, I think the other thing about that is that sometimes you might feel like, well, why would I spend the time doing that if there's a good possibility that there's nothing there? And it's totally valid because you know what? There's only so much time. Do you really want to sit there spending hours listening to somebody and then at the end being like, wow, that's some shitty music?
There are people, they like what
You
they
know?
like and they don't want to deviate from it because exactly that. I only got so many hours here on this planet. Why am I going to sit there and listen to something I don't know I like?
You're not gonna. No one's gonna like everything anyway. So I mean,
Right. Well, that all said, I think that's super important part of the process, and I think you have all these opportunities to learn from other people and influence your own process, and hopefully you become motivated to do more of it. I do want to speak to how you work in your own world. You have a work-life balance situation that I want to touch on. I feel like you're hitting 3 pockets. You're hitting 3. If there's a spectrum, you're on the left, on the right, in the middle. So there is you have the job that's like, this is work. I got to go do this. This is where my money comes from. This finances things. You also have this other job where you are meeting in the middle. You have, you teach guitar, piano, beginner violin, I believe, as well, right? Or a little more than beginner.
I was. I'm moving away from that in particular. But yeah, I teach mostly guitar and piano, and I would teach bass, but I happen to not have any bass students right now, but I have taught bass.
So you have this. It's sort of a fusion of the two, where it's like, it's music and you love music, but it's a job, but it's maybe not the thing you love doing the most. It's sort of a, hey, this is in my ballpark. I like it and whatever. And then you have the other end, right, which is just purely making music, being creative, doing the not project, doing whatever Derek Smith wants to make because Derek Smith wants to make it. Now, there has to be a harmony to do all 3 of these things because most people do not have that kind of time. So if I can be so bold as to lead you into this, it seems that you've found I'm going to use the words, I'm going to say desk job because of the name of the show. It's not a desk job though, but you found the job that is fairly flexible, that allows you the opportunity to create more. And then you found an opportunity in the middle to offset any necessary financial differences without it being soul crushing. Now, I'm sure that balance is working right now. It may not work forever. And I know it didn't happen overnight. So can you speak at all to the points of finding a good balance for you and perhaps what it took and where you went wrong before you got it close to right?
Yeah. So, well, as I was saying before, when I was talking about organizing your workflow, so I can mostly talk about mistakes and not having that balance.
Right. Yeah.
Because what I would say, I mean, full disclosure, I definitely don't make enough to really feel particularly comfortable. But the one thing I will say, though, that I have found, at least in my current situation, is that I've found jobs that pay well for the small amount of time that you're working. And, the problem is that those types of jobs tend to be, not necessarily super steady always. They can be a little bit contingent on situations, working as a contractor, things like that. There's plenty of drawbacks to it. But the thing that I like about it, considering the amount of hours I'm working, it's pretty good money for the amount of time I'm actually doing it. It allows me plenty of free time to work on things, work on music, and be a sane person. I guess everyone has different thresholds for patience for different types of jobs. And I would just say to anyone, that I think that's a really important thing. It's also a luxury. There's a lot of people who are creatively minded, but they might be stuck in really bad situations. They end up having to work long hours, not making enough money, and that's not really their own fault. you know. So,
Sure,
I mean,
and there is always that asterisk that there, anybody who is in a position where they want to be creative and they can't because life threw them a bum hand, that's not ever who I'm speaking to it with any malice. My hope is that those people understand that, if you want it bad enough, I'm not saying this is going to solve your problems, because that would be snake oil, but you might be able to start carving out opportunities to be creative. You may be in a position to look for a job, say, like you have, where there is more flexibility, that the opportunities are there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, that's what's worked for me. If not 100% financially, at least just for my sanity, I guess. Well,
speak to that too, because you having not making as much money as you would ideally like to make, but you do have this ability to create as much as you'd like to create.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's so many things to want in life. You know what I mean? Like, and at a certain point, you have to prioritize what you want. Like, for example, like I would. Well, not right now, but in general, I would love to travel.
Right.
I mean, I love traveling, and I can say that I've done a very small fraction of traveling in my life compared to what I would like to do. But at the same time, I'm also kind of like, well, that's a choice. I mean, first of all, it doesn't mean that that opportunity won't happen anyway. But I guess I'm just saying that, like, it's very easy to want to do everything. And at a certain point, you have to say, well, what do I want most? And I think that's really, there are sacrifices that you have to make sometimes to do certain things. Doesn't mean you have to make all the sacrifices, or, it just means, you do have to pick and choose a bit when you're thinking about what you want to do with yourself, and in terms of like what role creativity plays in your life if you're a creative person. And I mean, absolutely, if you're thinking about trying to make any kind of money doing something creative, or heck, even if it's not about money, even if it's you're just saying like, it's my life goal to record an album or whatever creative project you want to do, it might mean that you might have to sacrifice something. You almost certainly will.
Would you care to talk about anything perhaps that you've had to sacrifice for your craft, and would you say it was worth it?
Yeah, there's certain things I would say yes, just in general, that I might not just want to get into, but I would say that, maybe as a counterpoint to myself, there's sometimes where you think you're making a sacrifice to do something, and maybe it's not a necessary sacrifice to make. And I mean, that's just, I think that's just a life lesson, whether you're talking about creativity or anything. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes a situation appears as like okay, you have to make choice A or B, and it's really kind of a red herring. You know what I mean? Like, that's a little outside of creativity specifically, but I think that it comes into play. So, I mean, like, just being aware of what your intentions and your goals are and what's necessary to do it really is the bottom line. And, in that balance with jobs is, it's funny that you started this part saying, you got the left, right, and center. And it's funny because I'm just like a radical leftist at this point, like, I know that's not how you meant it. I'm just making it joke, but like, I think most jobs are, and ways that finances work are just straight out immoral, like evil, like just horrible. So like, I mean, like, at a certain point, like, yeah, you got to live and you got to do what you got to do to survive. And you have to weigh these kind of options and choices and things like that. But like, I mean, I don't think anyone should feel bad for not quote unquote making it,
Sure.
financially or otherwise. We live in a weird world, and it's not really very fair or consistent, or right. I don't know.
if the idea of making it is the idea of making enough money to keep consuming stuff that doesn't make you happy in a lasting way, then I don't want to make it.
Right, exactly.
For me and for you, I think also it's a matter of being able to express ourselves creatively and, survive and sometimes thrive. And, I think that is really all you can ever hope for being a creative.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. No, I'm all for that. I agree. And I guess to kind of go back to your initial question with this is, if somebody's, trying to, like, if I had anything to say, if somebody who's trying to find that kind of balance or direction in their life, I think when it comes down to creativity, it really is, it's more of a mindset than anything, I think it's learning how to look at things creatively too, which is something that, no one's stopping you from doing that,
Right. Yeah. That's something they can't take from you.
Yeah, exactly. You always got your head. And I think it's an important thing that, I know we don't have a ton of time, but just to kind of, I get a real kick out of a lot of stuff with, like, kind of, I guess, internet culture that surrounds music production.
Sure. Let's talk about it. What do you?
Yeah. I love it. I follow all these, Instagram accounts and all these forums and everything like that. And, for one, they're really, really helpful. It's really cool that nowadays if you have a question on how to use something, or if you're trying to research something, just go online. You could just go right on your phone, and just figure it out. You could ask somebody, or you could find somebody who had the same question or whatever, watch a video, So I think it's really cool and very positive. But I do also find it kind of funny and sometimes potentially pretty negative. And I'm a self-professed gearhead. I mean, talk about having financial problems. I mean, all my money went into equipment. not all of it. I'm somewhat responsible. I sell stuff too when I'm not using it. So I'd advise being responsible with any gear spending to anybody listening. But anyway, but when you watch these videos or you read these things, for a long time, like, with especially with electronic stuff, with synths, modular synths, Eurorack, all this stuff, some of it gets really expensive. Some of it's very, very expensive. And, even if you're not going for the high price options, it certainly adds up. And, it's just funny because I felt like there was this kind of swing in the whole music production community for a few years where everyone was like building up and getting analog stuff, these outboard racks and like these like crazy big setups. And then, Billie Eilish made that album and she did it on a laptop. And I mean, it's a little misleading because I do know that they used outboard and, I'm sure it was mastered by some crazy mastering engineer using the best stuff on earth. And, right. So it's a little bit misleading, but it's true. It was done more or less on a laptop with minimal equipment and not super expensive equipment. And it's just funny because I felt like all of a sudden, partially because of that, and I think partially because everyone must have just went broke buying these crazy big setups, is that there was this swing the other way. It's like, oh, you can record just on a laptop. But what's funny, I mean, this is just one of the funnier things I've seen is, like Eurorack racks, so you used to see these huge ones, but now you see people with these tiny little Eurorack setups, but there might be like 3 modules in it, but it costs like $4,000. It's the nicest ones. It's just funny because it's like, oh, now I need to go with a small setup, but let me still spend as much as I can. Right.
Well, they'll find a way. They'll find a way to pay.
Exactly. But anyway, that's a bit of a long story, but the reason I said it was because, it's funny that even though the idea was like, oh, you don't need to pressure yourself, you don't need to spend a lot of money, it's like, oh, now I have to not pressure myself. You know what I mean? And that's like the new pressure,
Right.
It's kind of like, but it's just funny to watch it, to kind of see that kind of happening. But like, the reason I'm saying it is because it has really nothing to do with the setup being small or large or expensive or not expensive. There's nothing wrong with having some really nice gear. I love it, and it's important. I mean, but it's not essential. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
You should be working with things it's important to be working with things that allow you to do what you wish to do. It's not always essential, and limitation also breeds creativity. But creativity is also just its own thing. And I mean, like, you can just look at situations creatively. Lately, I've been finding a lot of creative juice just from when I'm doing something that's quote unquote not being productive or quote unquote not being creative, trying to approach it from a different perspective. I find that that's really just as important. And there's not this sharp line between how you're living your life and how you're viewing things and thinking about things and your creative life. You know what I mean? Like, that line is only where you want to draw it, and if you want to draw it. Like, you can approach your whole life creatively. And
are there let me stop you there. Are there any ways that you approach your day-to-day life in what you would see as a creative way?
Honestly, I think simple mindfulness practice is very creative, in the sense of, like, if you're opening yourself to experiencing things without latching on to whatever mental chatter that you may have. I think that's an inherently creative act, because you're opening yourself to experience. And I think that also, applying that same kind of awareness and meditation to your own thought or associations, and mental associations and things like that. The way that I think of it is, it's kind of like, imagine you're just kind of zooming the camera out. If you have a thought, instead of just taking it at face value, zoom the camera out and be aware of that thought. Okay, now you have a bigger way of thinking about that thought. How does that relate to my other thoughts? So, for example, I mean, you could think about, just take a daily experience, and again, approaching things creatively like this might not look tremendously different than just somebody doing their day-to-day thing. But, like, let's say you're at the grocery store and you're online or something. Instead of just thinking like, oh, I'm just bored online, I'm going to look at my phone, or I'm just going to sit here thinking about what a jerk that old lady is buying a gallon of milk with a check. You know what I mean? Like, or like, if you kind of just allow yourself to be aware of the situation, I think, you'll find a lot more interesting things going on than whatever default you can, unfortunately, I think everyone can slip into,
Sure.
So I guess that's what I mean, just by like saying, like, approaching things creatively. Because I think if you're sitting there and you're on the line to buy something, and you're just sitting there like a grumpy, sad bastard, that humdrum type of thing, and then just think you're going to go home and all of a sudden the creativity is going to pop on. You know what I mean? Like, there's like a weird split if you're not allowing that creativity or openness into the rest of your life.
Right. It sounds like what you're suggesting here is that by allowing your mind to roam when it doesn't normally instinctively do so, say online at the grocery store, you're putting your mind in a creative space before you ever get to the creative space. So it's like you're already warmed up and you're just more open to that stimulus to start, and you're not, I can't imagine going a whole day where it's like, I have to be rigid now because I'm at work. I have to be rigid now because I'm in traffic. I'm rigid now because I have to be at this thing for my mother-in-law's thing or whatever, and just always having to be in that position and then suddenly being like, all right, great, I've got a half an hour to be creative. Why don't I feel it all of a sudden? It's because you have been rigid the whole time.
And, it's funny because I see this a lot with what's going on with the quarantine. And and by the way, I'm saying this not at all to be critical of anybody who is feeling it necessary to take it easy and not do anything, because I've been doing plenty of that myself. But I think it's part of the reason why I keep seeing these things of like, oh yeah, you'd think I'd be productive, but I'm just sitting here doing nothing, or a lot of that type of stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, because you've been holding yourself stressed out, and there is also an element of, if you're not looking to find that space otherwise, well, what do you think's going to happen if you're running around with all this tension? The moment that you stop, you're going to need to relax, which is natural, and you have to do because you've been doing that. But if you can find a way to live your life where you can approach it with that openness and creativity, all of a sudden that line's not there, and you don't find yourself needing to crash. Instead, it's like what I was saying before, like sometimes it almost seems like there's a false choice, like I could be creative, or I could sit around and do nothing. Well, that shouldn't have to be a choice, really, right? Because right, like, I mean, like, why is that the choice? You know what I mean? Like, it really shouldn't be. So I think the idea is like trying to come to a different mindset to say, like, how can I allow myself to be receptive to creativity?
I think part of that is, like you said, pulling yourself out of your phone, kind of being observant, maybe playing games with the things around you in a setting, like, again, the grocery store, for example. One thing comes to mind specifically when you say that, which is when I was in college, there was a woman who was a graduate of the school, and she was coming back to explain to this class about an invention she had come up with. And it was, it seems like not much of an invention at all. It was a pill bottle that you'd get from the pharmacy. And it was, instead of it being a perfect cylinder, it was a half a cylinder split vertically. So you figure you're standing up the pill bottle, it's like one half is round, the other half is flat, and it had these two little lips on it, and you could slide the papers that come with your medication into the slot. Now that sounds like nothing. It really doesn't. But what had happened was this woman had seen her grandparents struggle with the medication regimens that they both had, and she got frustrated, and so she decided to try to be creative about something she was seeing happen every day. She was seeing her grandparents struggle with a routine thing, and she could have just acknowledged this is a routine thing, or she put herself in a position where she was playing with the idea and challenging the very notion of the routine thing that was happening. Well, why is this the way you're doing it? Why is it when you go to the pharmacy and you get pills, why do they just throw these giant instructions in the bag for you to lose and mix up? Why isn't there just a way to put it there? So she invents this thing, which is, again, hardly an invention. It's a bottle. It's just a bottle. But that idea ended up being pitched to Target. And then I don't know if they still do, but Target for a long time used her invention as the means of their pharmacy to keep things safer for the elderly and everybody else. And that would not have happened if you were just not playing creative games and challenging, but why is that in your day to day? I mean, as a designer, what they'd like to say is that, design is for communication. Design is for engineering is for problem solving. Art is for emotions. I think there's a way that it can all be harmonious. And I think no matter which one of those professions you fall into, if it's for purely pragmatic reasons like an engineer or purely emotional reasons like an artist, it's still important to ask, but why is this the way it is?
Yeah. That's so much of what creativity is all about anyway, right? I mean, it's really just picking apart your direct sensual perception of what's happening, as well as your mental perception of what that is and why that is, and your understanding of it, and your feelings about it, you feel about it. Like it's how all these things intersect. I really don't think you can separate it from the rest of your life. And I mean, I find it interesting hearing stories about there's some kind of, I feel like it's always like famous singers. Like I think of Van Morrison or like Frank Sinatra. There's all these stories about what like monstrous people they were. It strikes me as odd that somebody could be that talented, but then just be such like a bastard. But I mean, so I don't know, but it's such a weird thing. You got to think about like, how are you going to be, I guess it doesn't preclude somebody from being artistic or creative or successful, but it's probably a good idea just to be a sane, happy person that other people would possibly want to be around.
Yeah, I mean, talent does not make up for personality, and I think part of if we're to talk like exposure, getting out there, I'm sure your work's good, but you might have a little more luck if you're just decent. It seems that there are a lot of people who like to enjoy putting their ego before the horse.
It's an easy thing to fall into because definitely it's like promoted practically, and
well, yeah, it's that, and also the fact that we as creative people tend to find ourselves alone often. There's this image of us being social and playing in front of an audience or having a gallery or being on social media, like that, even the word. But I mean, in truth, there is so much time behind closed door. You spend so much time in your own head that I can see how you'd fall in the trap of becoming a real arrogant person, and you think your way is the right way because you made it, or you're here. So I can see how you could fall into that, but I can't see it being a long-lasting thing. But then again, some real schmucks have made it real far. So who am I to say? But
well, as a leftist, I'm going to say it probably says more about capitalism than it does about art.
that's an important discussion to have. I think that it's sort of insane that like there's a big part of this show where I'm literally trying to speak to capitalism in art in some respect. Like, I do want this show to touch on that because I want you to create. I just want you to make enough to be happy enough to create, not to... I mean, this isn't some show about trying to make all the money. It's this show about making stuff and feeling fulfilled and learning to be content with what you make and that being enough. And maybe money is not the end goal, but rather is just sort of like helping pave the road you're walking on, as opposed to...
Yeah, and I mean, it's just it's a reality.
That's
in the sense that like we it's there. You could try to ignore it, but people who whatever debt you have, or if you want to eat, like they're not going to ignore it. So you have to figure it out some way or another.
I tried ignoring it for a while. It doesn't work out well.
No, it doesn't. So you got to come to some sort of terms with it, no matter what you think of it. So,
well, I don't know, man. We talked for a while, and I could talk forever. Usually, I feel like I was like, I don't know. I'm glad this kind of went where it did because it got into much more abstract territory. It got into so much about the fundamentals of the way we think from the ground up. And I'm really inspired by some of the things you said here today. And before we go, is there any like lasting notes you want to leave people with? Anything you want to touch on as far as advice? And
no, I got no advice.
Great, you ain't getting none, audience.
No advice for nobody.
You ain't getting no advice from nobody. I don't know. I think if anybody listened to this conversation, they may have gotten a couple of good nuggets out of there because I jotted down a few things myself. And I'll speak to all that after I get off this call with you. But thanks so much for talking about doing the thing you love. That means a lot to me that you took the time to talk to me tonight.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Paul. It's always good chatting.
Big fan.
Thanks.
I didn't say that anywhere in there, I don't think. I think I waited to the very end to say big fan.
Big fan.
Big fan, first time caller. Derek, thanks so much, man. I'll talk to you later, all right?
I'll talk to you soon, man.
Later.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Derek Smith. You can find him at notsounds, notsounds.bandcamp.com. You can also find him Not Sounds on Instagram. That's not sound twice. And if you're interested in taking lessons with Derek or learning more about what Derek does, you can also look him up at dereksmithguitar.com. I do want to make a note of the article that he mentioned and of the person he mentioned, Gary O'Keefe. Gary O'Keefe is a bandmate of Derek's in the project Yankee Longstraw. He's also an incredibly talented engineer and musician. I included Yankee Longstraw's information as well as the article in the show notes. The one big takeaway for me from this interview was the practice of thinking creatively all the time. I love the way he phrased that. Your brain is a muscle. It requires exercise. Do not wait for the perfect set of circumstances to be creative. Try being creative with your day-to-day routine, and you may be surprised by the things that happen. I just want to say thanks to Derek again. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing, supporting the show. Please continue to do so. Rate, subscribe, all that. And thanks again to Derek for this awesome outro music. I'll be using this a lot more. Take care.